Welcome to the Clear Admit MBA Admissions Academy. I'm Graham Richmond, and I'm joined by Alex Brown, and this lesson is all about understanding your admissions reader. Alex, I've already told you this is like my favorite topic because I was personally fascinated when I started to work in admissions, having already applied to business school myself, and then I began working in the admissions office. I was fascinated to meet the very people who read the files because they weren't the types of people that I thought. I thought when I was applying to business school that it would be finance people or, people working who have kind of business backgrounds making these decisions about who the next business leaders could be. And that wasn't the case. But before we get into all that, I want to back up a second and ask you, why does it matter? Like, why do we care about the audience? This is kind of a marketing question.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, folks, you're applying for an MBA program. This is marketing 101, right?
Yeah.
You need to understand who's making the decisions based on your candidacy.
Right. And I guess just to put it very bluntly, you are a product that you are marketing to an audience. And in this case, the audience is the admissions committee. And so I love to geek out about trying to figure out who are these people, what's their typical background. And so, we talk about this, but I would argue more female than male. So there are more women reading files than men in these admissions offices. I think rather than having MBAs, the lion's share often will have maybe a liberal arts degree or a master's in education or psych.
Yeah.
It's not the crowd that most people would have in mind. It's not a set of professors or faculty sitting down.
Right.
So now I know there's some exceptions. You like to talk about the director exception. So get into that.
Yeah, so the director, for the most part, will have an MBA.
Yeah.
Certainly at many of the top schools. And oftentimes it'll actually be an MBA from that particular program. I think Harvard, that's basically, you can't
kind of
be Harvard's MBA admissions director without an MBA. And actually Harvard, their admissions committee is often full of MBAs, but they're a little bit of an outlier in that regard.
Agreed.
I completely agree. There's sort of more liberal arts, more education sort of backgrounds, and this really does sort of matter in as much as how do you approach for instance, the language you use in describing your experiences and so on and so forth. You can't assume that these folks all have the same sort of experience and understanding that you have.
Yeah, and actually, let's dive into that just for a second. So we talk about jargon and understanding your reader, and I would say a really good metaphor here is think of the reader as being really bright. So I always say think of like a high school English literature professor. That they're smart, but if you start diving into finance jargon, or even if you're a military vet and you're starting to use all kinds of jargon, they're going to get lost just like anybody would. So you need to explain what you've done in your background as you're marketing to this committee in ways that a smart person without expertise in your domain would understand.
Yeah, perfect.
So the other thing, though, I wanted to ask and get into a discussion on is I love to think about the pressure that's on the admissions committee.
Yeah.
So we know from the lesson that we did on rankings that they need to bring in a class that's highly selective admissions process with great, all kinds of great students and things. But there are I would argue there are kind of different pressures exerted on them. One of them comes from the career services office on campus. So do you want to talk about that at all?
Sure. I mean, obviously career services, their job is their task to sort of find employment opportunities for the MBAs through the internship process, and then their sort of the exit job, that sort of short-term goal and so on and so forth. So that the career services, they would actually probably rather you just bring in a whole bunch of bankers and consultants and tech folk so that they can make sure that they've got roles, because those industries are really coming to campus and seeking out MBAs. But in the academic portion of it, you actually want a much more sort of diverse classroom, because folks with different sort of experiences really enrich the whole learning environment. So there's going to be tension. So whether it's career services, the tension with with the sort of candidates they like you to bring in. Academic services, they want to make sure that you bring in candidates that have the high test scores and the high GPAs so that they excel in the classroom. You've probably got, the student. There are other each of these different groups have priorities, and you've got to sort of, as the admissions director, balance all that. The alumni folks is another great example, actually.
Yeah, so I would argue it's really important to know, like, when someone picks up your file and reads it, what's in the back of their mind? It's like, can this person get a job?
Yeah.
Will this person, as you say, excel in the classroom?
Yeah.
And finally, will they contribute to the day-to-day life on campus by joining clubs and activities? And maybe there's another one, which is, is the alumni community going to be happy with this person? Or, there are other factors too. But I just think it's always useful to know, like, what's on this person's mind as they pick up your file. And the reason is because I think the admissions office is held accountable. I remember when you and I worked at Wharton, for example, when a candidate comes in, if they do not excel in the program and are actually, getting really poor grades, we would hear about that, and it would be sort of like, why did you admit this person? And then we would be, it's kind of our necks on the line. So as you're reading a file, you're thinking about that. You want to make sure that the person you bring in is going to excel and be able to not just survive, but ideally thrive, right? Yeah. So in any event, I just think it's so useful. And the last thing I wanted to mention as we kind of wrap up this lesson is I feel like there's a sense on the admission side that candidates there's always a subset of candidates who you get this feel that they just want to punch their ticket. They're getting the MBA because everyone else at their firm did it before, and they're not as excited about the academic process. And because of the background of many of these admissions officers, often liberal arts or, just kind of, they work in education. That's their passion. I think it's really important to be aware of that as you travel through this process. And you don't want to ever give the sense that you're, just there to get the degree and get in and get out, that kind of thing.
Yeah, you don't want to ruffle the feathers of the folks that are reading your application.
Exactly. Yeah. And then, I guess there is one other piece here that we didn't get into, which is I think that this crowd, and again, maybe it's because some of them have masters in education or psych or whatever it is, I think they really like to understand the whys behind what you've done. And so, again, they haven't followed in your footsteps in terms of their own career necessarily. And so I think they really want to understand, why have you made the decisions you've made? And it's not just, this is what I've done. It's why and how and all that stuff. So that's,
knowing the whys, I think, is fundamental. Or expressing the whys in your essays and so forth. We're not just reading a resume, but we want to know why you switched, from this position to this position, what you got out of each of your experiences, and how that sort of pathway is threading together as in terms of why the MBA now makes sense, and so on and so forth. I'm going to bring up one additional point. I know you keep trying to wrap up, Graham, but I'm going to catch you out there. Also, the pressure that the reader is under. I just remember, some days I'd have to get through 25, 30 applications and make decisions on them. It might be a first decision, but make decisions on them. Assume that you're at the bottom of that pile.
Yeah,
because
agreed.
That may well be the case, and that means you've got to do a really good job of articulating all this stuff.
Yeah, agreed. And I think, again, this is, as you said, marketing 101.
Yes.
Know your audience. You're selling yourself.
Yeah.
And so, for better or for worse, admissions officers, they're admitting applications, not applicants, right?
Yeah.
They don't really get to hang out with you for 6 months and truly get to know you. They have to read a file and make a decision. Maybe they have an interview as well. But anyway, I just think it's such a useful exercise to get into their head and understand what they're looking for, what pressures they face on their campus, and how they're trying to make these decisions.
Yeah.
So, in any event, this is vital to me. I know it's something that, as I said, it's like a pet project of mine. I love talking about this one. But in any event, our next lesson is going to be all about demonstrating fit. So tune in for that one.